Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. Today we're talking about Lamborghinis, particularly the Lamborghini Jarama, spelt J-A-R-A-M-A. This was a sort of one of Lamborghini's niche models. It was a 2+2 that was brought out in 1970, hence the fact 2020 is the 50th anniversary. It's also the 50th anniversary of the Urracco, the small V8 Lamborghini, which was a sort of Porsche 911 Ferrari Dino rival. But I'm particularly focusing on the Jarama because we happen to have two of them in the workshop. Just a nice sort of coincidence, really. They're both GTSs, these cars. One has come from Switzerland and the other one has come from Belgium. And we've been doing some restoration work on both of them. The green car has had a ground-up restoration. We've done a bare metal repaint on it. We've rebuilt the engine. We've made new carpets, headlining for the interior. And the silver car, we've done new carpets and new headlining and a general sort of makeover. So they've both had quite a bit of work, really. But the Jarama was an interesting piece of Lamborghini history because Ferruccio actually said it was one of the cars that he liked most. He had one himself and he drove it. He had one of most Lamborghini models, actually, but the Jarama was a personal favourite. It's interesting to think that Ferruccio Lamborghini, when he started Lamborghini, his vision was for building 2+2 GT cars, very much the sort of car that you could, in the day, jump in and drive halfway across Europe in, really. Not many cars could do that at the time in comfort. And the start of the whole mission of Ferruccio's to make his own cars started with a Ferrari 250 GTE that he had a problem with the clutch on it, kept failing, and I've heard this from the Lamborghini family directly. Both Tonino and Fabio Lamborghini have independently told me this story, so it's as validated as it can possibly be. That Ferruccio had obviously he had made a lot of money through his heating and air conditioning businesses and his tractor business. He decided to start making road cars after he went to Maranello and complained to Enzo Ferrari about the clutch on his Ferrari 250 GTE. And as many people had, he had the Ferrari brush off. He was kept waiting for 2 hours. Then all of a sudden, Il Commendatore couldn't see him for whatever reason, and he was told politely to leave the premises. And that, bearing in mind the sort of people who could afford to buy a Ferrari, Enzo Ferrari was ruffling quite a few feathers, really. But he certainly ruffled Ferruccio Lamborghini's. And his dream, his vision, was to make a car that was similar to the Ferrari 250 GTE, which is a 2+2 V12 French engine, rear-wheel drive, traditional GT. And the reason why he loved the Jarama so much is because it was pretty well exactly that. It was 7 years after he started Automobili Lamborghini. It was in 1970, but interesting car in Lamborghini history. One of Ferruccio's favourites. We'll have a look at what we've been doing to it, and then we'll take it for a little run. The engine in the green car is really fresh. We've just rebuilt it, we've just put it back in. It's probably about 3 or 4 hours old only, but it's still running okay. We just need to be careful how we bed it in. So let's have a look at the cars and let's take them for a drive. The funny thing about Italian coach builders is, most of the time they get it right, but occasionally they don't. And when they don't, their mistakes are not too public, but some of them are. So let me try and unpack that a bit. When we think of Italian coach building, we think of the beauties, the Pininfarina masterpieces, the Ferrari 275, cars like that. But the Jarama although it was one of Ferruccio's favourite cars, it was stylistically a little bit controversial. And some people love the styling, others don't like it. It fell into two generations. There was the GT, the early cars, which had the beautiful knock-on Miura wheels, which really did set the car off fantastically, as they did all of them. And the later cars had the bolt-on Espada type wheels, which weren't sort of quite as nice looking, really, although every bit as practical. But the original dashboard was a bit of a disaster, really, not to put too fine a point on it. It was stylistically very bland, really, for so expensive a car. And the Series 2, which both of these are, the GTS, actually had a far more successful and resolved dash layout in it, something you'd actually quite enjoy sitting behind if you were driving across Europe, which couldn't really be said of the earlier ones. Also, they have this, the GTSs, to try and cope with underbonnet heat. They have these vents on the front wings to try and keep the engine compartment cool. V12s are notoriously difficult to keep cool in any car, or in any application actually, because the heat at the back, normally the coolant circulates from the front to the back of the engine. The heat buildup at the back can be quite tremendous. But as I said, we've reupholstered the actual seats, and the door trims are the same, but everything else we've redone. So the dashboard we've done in what's called the original mouse hair material, which is a flocked material. It's plastic with a sort of flock coating stuck to it, which was beloved of Italian coach builders in the 1960s and 70s. Ferrari used it on the Dino and Daytona. Lamborghini used it on their dashboards. Maserati used it on some of theirs. And it was expensive, and it still is, but it fades badly in UV light. It sort of turns grey instead of black, or even a beigey grey quite quickly. So we retrimmed that. We've made new carpets for it, and we've retrimmed the headlining. And on the silver car, the coach builder was Marazzi, the original coach builder who built the cars for Lamborghini. They actually had their own rubber floor mat with Marazzi built into them. And the silver car has still got those, so we've managed to adapt those onto the new carpets very carefully, because the rubber's so old, it's quite hard and quite brittle, so that's not an easy job, but we've managed to do it. And the car itself conceptually is shorter than the Espada. It's a 2+2, not a full four-seater. They handle really well. The underpinnings are sort of generic Lamborghini. It's their typical staple 4-litre V12 from the time, developing around about either 325 or 350 brake horsepower, depending on which brochure you read and which person you speak to. But they were a quick car for their day. They were one of the fastest 2+2s, really, well north of 150 miles an hour. And the suspension, the gearbox, the brakes were all generic Lamborghini, a lot of crossover parts, even the suspension arms off the Miura, a surprising amount of interchangeability, a bit like modern cars really. Even the gearbox internals are the same as a Miura, but just obviously conventionally mounted. So an interesting car, great piece of Lamborghini history. The Jarama was very much a joint project between different parties. So Bertoni styled it, Marcello, the Miura and Countach designers styled it under the guiding hand of Paolo Stanzani at the Lamborghini factory, and Marazzi, the coach builders, built it. The interesting thing about this particular car is that it's the odd one out. Jaramas were very user-friendly. People could drive them on an everyday basis, but this car has only done 9,000 and odd kilometres from new. Astonishing, really, considering it's nearly 50 years old. One of the successes for me of the Jarama's styling is the pop-down headlights. Up until US particularly regulations outlawed pop-up headlights or covered headlights that popped up at night. Lots of cars had pop-up headlights, but very few of them, in fact, I don't know of any other car that springs to mind, actually had pop-down headlights. So these flaps, when you turn the headlights on, actually swivel down underneath. Very clever. Just a nice styling touch and very so Italian, really. The engine in this car, as I mentioned earlier, is only hours old, really. So I'm just carefully bringing it to life. When these were new, they were running in the factory on Schenck dynamometers, which were sort of cutting edge dynamometers. I think they had 3 or 4 of them in a row, with purpose-built rooms and everything. We don't have that, so we do it the normal way, which is to gently bring them to life on the road, and you know, there we have it. But this is performing really well. I'm not putting it under any great strain at the moment. Just bared the rings in to start with gently, and but she's pulling really nicely. It is an old cliche, but these cars really do shrink around you. I mean, this is quite a sizable car, big wide center console, and the seats quite far apart. but it doesn't feel that big. The beauty of all Lamborghinis is that they drive well. They do drive well. Bob Wallace knew what he was doing when he sorted this car out. The test driver that started off with Ferruccio, and it's got this gutsy V12, and even though I'm just nursing it to life, it's still got all the pulling power you would want from low revs. And this dashboard, as I say, is actually quite a nice thing to look at. So it's not a bad place to be a mobile office from. Yeah, a very capable cross-country tourer in its period. People actually use their Jaramas, which is why they have not necessarily very low mileages. People actually did use them for what they were built for. Even better, really. The interior trim on this car, as I mentioned earlier, this center console, the seats, the door trims, it's all factory from 1970. We've managed to preserve that for the owner. He made the decision, I believe quite rightly, to keep the interior trim because it's a lovely timepiece, but it has this strange sort of velour and vinyl, like a lot of cars of this period did. So it's still very comfortable. The seat still feels in good shape. Yeah, it feels good, this car. Holding the road well, brakes are fine, not pulling. We've changed the fluid, given it a good service, and it's running really sweetly. Just a question of putting some kilometres, some miles on it now to bed everything in before it goes on its merry way back to Switzerland. Well, I've done a few more kilometres now, a few more miles, so we can just slightly start to open the engine up now. No histrionics yet, but let's see if she's pulling okay. Oh yes, bags of power there. Very, very happy with that. And yeah, all good. Well, I hope you enjoyed that insight into one of the less well-known Lamborghinis, but one that was very close to the founder's heart. If you do like this channel, please like, please subscribe, please share, and we'll be back soon.